Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of SuperFantaFi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Brea Season 3, Episode 4. Great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Okay, so first and foremost, let's start off with the past stuff. Well, everything in 10,000 BC. Obviously, there's a fire spreading just as Gavin and Sam get this message from the person who took Eve. They have Eve and they want her in exchange for the microchip. But obviously Gavin doesn't have enough of his memories to know where the microchip is. And even if he did, most likely the microchip's in 2021. So like, how does he deal with that? It's so interesting too when you think about it, because it's like, it's an interesting thing of like, did things change so much? Because all this is kind of happening in 2021 without any of our knowledge. Like, Gavin didn't remember the program that he was a part of until now. And it's so, I mean, like, so is that only because, is that because the military got, like, how long, because the military had to have come here after the events of season 2 where everything started folding into this particular time period at the end of season 2. So that means they probably came here unintentionally, or maybe they finally got things working and they could get here. I have no idea, because it's just like the confluence of just everything going down, of just like, right, this people who have connection to Gavin, who's connected to this program, ended up being here in 10,000 BC, but only like in the aftermath of everything that went down. And that means, like, because so much stuff was happening present day before they ended up in the sinkhole, that makes you go like, this was already in the background the entire time, which is so interesting considering, like, okay, we have all this stuff in present day, but let's not forget this all started because of the future. So it's like, where like Gavin and his dad and his grandfather and Aldridge and them are actually originally from. So, because this also feels like it folds into what they were talking about. Well, at least what Aldridge had brought up in season 1. She had, or I think it came up in season 1, but maybe no, I think it came up in season 2. But there's that whole conversation about how she was saying like Scott was important. No, I think that was all season 1. I don't think she was in season 2. I think Aldridge was only in season 1. I'm misremembering. But I think she made the point of like how important Scott was in the grand scheme of things, and I think we're circling back to that now, because I think his research and everything that he was looking into, even though it didn't directly connect to time travel, it still plays some role in this, because eventually Gavin remembers, like, right, like he went, not only when he stole the microchip, he remembers being handed some papers that like Scott had wrote, but Scott was like, before we left, I never published that, so how did anyone get their hands on it? It's like, it's the government. Someone must have, because they were keeping an eye on Scott, so they must have gotten wind of what he was researching and stuff like that. So, but basically, he was talking about different like flora and plants and stuff. It's like nothing that correlates to time travel. So there must be something here in this particular area that is either fundamental to the time travel thing, like maybe there's a plant that acts as a source of energy for it, or like he did say, for example, there was like a plant that had regenerative properties. Then I'm like, is it kind of going to be like a fountain of youth type of thing they're looking for? Like, it's something specifically Scott wrote about that was so important, because he's probably like very well versed in his, what's the word I'm looking for, like his lane of what he studied. He's probably like one of the top experts on it, so why they went to Scott specifically out of anyone else, like it's something specifically that he wrote about. Because now, like I said, like we know that Aldridge made that point back in season 1 that he was important somehow, and he never really got an answer to why he was at the heart of this. Because this episode kind of gives us answers to something I'd been wondering too, the whole larger conversation of, okay, so did all this time travel stuff start because, like, I can't remember whether James, Gavin's dad, whether or not James had said they were inspired by, like, that was my thinking, like, okay, they were inspired by research that took place in the past. They didn't have the resources to make it possible, but in the future they picked up that research again and they were able to complete it. That was kind of my thinking, but I could not remember if that was specifically said last season or whether that was just an assumption on my part. This episode kind of ties it back in to be like, no, they were already working on time travel stuff present day. And we'll get to it later on, but James kind of built off, I'm about to say our father, as in like Gavin and Elena's, but like I said, we'll get to that in a second. But James built off the foundation of the prior research, so it is kind of what I thought, but I don't remember clearly if they referenced that last season or not, that they were inspired, or whether they trying to take all the credit. It feels like I vaguely have a memory of them suggesting that they built off the foundation of someone else, but that could just be me basically incepting myself and putting that memory there when it never actually happened in the show. I don't know. But either way, all the while this is like going down in 10,000 BC, because Gavin ended up sending a message to Scott, which Scott was reluctant to be like, me around that time, I was in a dark place, but it's like, I don't know if I'm the most reliable person, but it's like, we don't know who else we can contact, because they don't know Ty's in 2021 doing its thing too, but they get in contact with, they leave a message in the tar pits for Scott. Scott has buddies who are going to be cleaning out the tar pit. They're going to send the message to Scott, which Scott gets the message, and he talks to Ty and Sam, but that's because he was trying to talk to Gavin, who was recently kidnapped by the woman that was following them the previous episode. So we find out in the long run of things that she is in fact his sister, half-sister specifically. So you're like, okay, so we know Gavin and his family are from the future, obviously, but it's like, is his half-sister from the future as well? Or did their dad go back in time and end up... because I actually don't remember. I was like, that's my problem. Like, I don't fully remember. I was like, didn't James get away at the end of last season? I don't remember. Like, that's why I'm wondering, like, did he get away at the end of last season, or did he die? I don't remember at all. But, like, we find out the Auroras take you to two different time periods, 1965 as well as 10,000 BC, or rather 10,000 BC and 2021, depending on which side of things you are in. But that's where, obviously, how Ty got here. So that, in turn, tells us that Riley and Josh are in 65, which is, I think, is so interesting. Once again, I guess because of the truncated season, we're not getting a lot of, like, what Josh and Riley have been up to, or even, Eve wasn't a big, well, she's kind of like the centerpiece of this, but she's not in the show in itself, so I just think that's interesting. I wonder where a lot of those corners cut for other reasons. Was it just writing reasons? Was it just storytelling reasons? Was it just timing, schedule-wise, with the season, that a lot of stuff had to be truncated like that? I guess it's also because, like, we got Josh and Riley having a time travel adventure last season when they were in the 80s, so I guess that's also why you wouldn't do that. But it's like, I think it's all going to come into play within the next episode or two. Maybe find out, like, what they were up to, what happened to them, especially if 1965 is where everything started. So when they probably went through the Aurora, maybe they ended up on, like, a military base or somewhere that's connected to this whole time travel thing. Like, wherever it's happening, the time travel stuff is happening in 65, that might be where they ended up, and that's maybe what we'll find out. We'll see. But it turns out Elena and Gavin had worked together on this whole thing of trying. The whole point was they're trying to dismantle it because they knew, it's like, our father was never really much of a father. He was so busy with his work and stuff. That's why I was like, I'm not sure she actually is, but the moment her saying the line of he was inspired and basically picked up where other people left off, I was like, okay, so you really are his daughter. But I'm like, who did he have another child with? Did he go back in time, end up in 65, but then, like, eventually met someone and eventually gave birth to her, or what? Considering, like, she can't be from the future, can she? Because, like, him and, like, because that never came up at all last season. Obviously, it's like you can retcon stuff and got him, like, as long as you don't completely retcon stuff, you can always retcon stuff by, like, adding context and stuff to it. So once again, we don't really have a word for that. When it's like, when you don't necessarily change stuff, you keep the stuff the same, but you add stuff to it. The example I always use is what WandaVision added to the context of Wanda Maximoff. But it's like, is that a retcon, or did you just, now Wanda has more knowledge about herself? Stuff like that, where I'm like, I don't quite know what the term would be for that. I just refer to it as like added context. So his sister's existence is just kind of added context. But it's like, did like James end up meeting someone when he traveled back in time or something and ended up having her? Or because it's like him and his wife. I'm like, what was Gavin's mom's name? Wasn't it Caroline? I believe it might have been. I don't remember now. But it's like they were still kind of like, even though they had their issues, they were still a couple. So it's like it has to be after the fact. So that's interesting. But it's also that timey-wimey thing of like, that means like there was already some version of James out there who already ended up being with Elena's mom and eventually giving birth to her. So like that was already something that was in play considering she was around in 2021. It's that whole thing of like it all coming full circle, Ouroboros snake eating its own tail of like, it's kind of sad because like Gavin constantly discovering his family. It's like, hey, I met my mom. Hey, I met my dad. Hey, I met my half sister. So it's kind of wild. And I guess it feels very befitting considering like there was so much going on with Gavin. Not only did he have his memory wiped about this project, he also was having all these visions. These visions themselves turned out to be memories from his childhood, being back in 10,000 BC, like just submerged, you know? So it's just interesting. Also sticking with present day, we had Ty and Sam trying to talk to Scott, but Scott doesn't want to believe them because he's like, dude, I how do I know you guys aren't lying to me, manipulating me? It's like you got this British accent or whatever, which I'm like, Scott, what do you have, my dude? Like that's a little I get it, like a lot of Brits get, you know, it's like the British accent works so well with the villainy. I get it, but still. But either way, when it's all said and done, I think it feels very poetic that it's Ty here because him being the therapist that he is, he's helped a lot of people. He helped Gavin, he helped Sam, and now he's helping Scott through a lot of stuff that he's going through. And it's like, I recognize his signs. He's like, this particular grilled cheese sandwich made this certain way was what your mom made anytime it was your comfort food. And he's like, the games, the way this place is a mess, the comic books, you used them as an escapism. You know, it first came up when your brother died, and it's kind of been your comfort and escapism ever since. So it turns out he was actually engaged. I guess he proposed to someone, and either they turned him down, but yeah, it's a bad breakup, which I thought was interesting. But it's like Ty's convincing him, it's like, I am your friend, I am here, like, you can trust us, we just want to help our friends. So got the message from Gavin. Sam had called in a buddy for like an APB on like Elena's like car, so it's like, right, they show up in time just when she's convincing Gavin to go back in the 65, but now he's torn between like his family telling him like, yo, I'm your sister, we just discovered each other, I'm telling we have to go back to 65 to stop all this, but then you have Ty being like, dude, she might be your sister, but I am like family to you too. It's like these two people who've popped up in your life, and it's just like they're both telling the truth, but it's like, if you want to save Eve's life, we need to do this, but it's like, and it's like, but stopping all of this is more important than it's more important than your wife's life. And luckily they were able to take the gun away from her, and Ty gets the microchip. Gavin chose to trust him. He goes back to 10,000 BC, which makes you go, what is that present day situation like? What does that mean in the grand scheme of things? Like that standoff that's there, is Gavin and them going to still decide to go to 65? It's like, well, there's no point in going now because they don't have the microchip, which I guess is going to be necessary to stop all of this. So you're like, I don't know what present day situation is going to look like, because even Scott had brought it up, like, what rule time are we using? Back to the Future rules? Are we doing Terminator rules? Is it string, like what it alternate multiverse type of stuff, string theory, single time? Like, that is a good question of, is this technically an alternate timeline now? Like, does the moment you go back in time, do you automatically create a new time? And obviously there's like, the fun Avengers Endgame of it all. Of like, no, none of that time travel stuff doesn't work. Time travel doesn't work the way it works in like Terminator, Back to the Future. I don't think Terminator was the other example to use, but Back to the Future is the one I always remember they used in Endgame, but I don't remember what the other one was. It might have been Terminator, but there was some other time travel reference they had made, but the one I always focused on was Back to the Future. So, like I said, it begs the question of like, is this an alternate timeline that continues on down its path and will always exist, or will it kind of get undone the moment they change everything? Because that was also the thing too of like, do you just get everyone from 10,000 BC back to present day because you don't want to undo everything they've been through? You just want to get everyone back home. Because if you maybe get them back to exactly when they left, but destroy all this time travel stuff so it never happens again, I would assume that's the end result, because you can't this ain't going to be a situation where you're going to undo a lot of stuff, because let's not forget Veronica's also pregnant, so we don't want to undo that. But there's certain things like, well, for example, Ella's still technically alive because that hasn't happened yet. So it begs the question then become like, well, if they get back to present day, some people that might have died might still be alive. Like, what, using a prime example being like an Ella, which I'd hope that'd be the case. So maybe it'd be like, right when the sinkhole appears, they pop back like nothing happened, but they have the experiences of 10,000 BC. You hope that's how that works, because like otherwise it's kind of like, are we just going to like completely wipe the slate clean from all that? I don't think there's too much growth in everything. Especially because even Sam had brought up, like he was talking to Ty, he was like me and Riley, he was wondering in the grand scheme of things, it's like, are we in a better place? And Ty was like, yeah, like you guys, your relationship has definitely gotten better in 10,000 BC, and that's what he's happy about, because things present day weren't completely the best, you know? So, which I think it's interesting bringing that up too, because obviously Sam was kind of going through some emotional stuff this episode, because there is a fire happening and it's spreading and getting closer to the fort. They ended up while they were getting away from the fort, they ended up running into this, not a dog, it was a wolf, but it was like, it's super adorable and cute, and you're just like, oh, and Lucas doesn't want to leave it behind, but like Sam being like, yeah, we don't want to weigh us down, and we kind of find out later on there was a fire situation, and he got his kids and his wife out, and he was just kind of, but you know, he felt like, oh, I failed Riley then, just like I'm failing Riley now. And we find out ultimately what was at the heart of all of this is he wasn't able to get Riley's dog out because he was so focused on getting his family out. He, you know, especially as someone who was in the military, you never leave anyone behind, and it was a part of their family, and it's like, it's something your daughter asked you to do. Like, all of this was kind of triggering something that just, it was, you might minuscule it in the grand scheme of things. I mean, it's horrific being like, holy crap, like their dog burned alive. Like that's a hardcore, like horrific stuff. So it's tied to like, oh, like a reminder in his life where he failed, and especially when that failure was tied to his daughter, which he feels like he's failing her. Like it resurfaced a lot of stuff. Like it's a lot of stuff compounded upon itself. These feelings and emotions are tied to this stuff. So that's what the wolf was kind of a representation of that, which I'm also like, oh, it's kind of cool and dope that you get to keep a pet. I don't know what you're going to do in the grand scheme of things, because it'd probably have to stay here, because you can't take the wolf with you back to present day if things go down, because it's not a dog, it's a wolf. So I don't know. That's kind of interesting. Obviously, we also had Lucas and oh my god, Veronica, jeez, I was blinking, sorry, make up, because he apologized. It's like, yeah, I was kind of out of line the way I reacted last episode, but it's like, hey, Ruth's going, like, you know, it's you're great at what you do, because for Veronica, it's her opportunity to kind of step up and feel like she kind of has a role and a purpose in everything. So she wants to kind of live up to the expectations Ruth has of her, and she wants to be able to kind of prove her worth, not necessarily to the group, because no one looks at her in that way, but it's just like to herself, and having such a pivotal role in the council. So when the time comes, like, oh, there's a dam that's man-made that we could go and break that might end up helping us tame the fire, Veronica jumps on that opportunity. Leads to the whole, like, all right, let's bust the dam open using some bullets to kind of set off an explosion to damage one of the pillars and set it all off, which I think it's very poetic that it's like, right, she missed the first two shots just because it's like, right, she's probably never fired a gun before, so it's like, all right, got to do this, and got it on the third shot. Third time's the charm, so. And it all worked out. Luckily, also, Sam, Lucas, and the wolf ended up being okay. Because for a second, she was scared because she thought, like, oh my god, they died. Like, she saw the blanket, they weren't responding, but they just kind of passed out a little from, like, the smoke. But luckily, they ended up being okay. So, that works out. It's these interesting parallels where it's just like, right, Sam's kind of going through like this growth and everything, and in the past in 2020, well, in the past, it's funny to say that, in present day in 2021, but also in 10,000 BC, these like growth situations are happening in parallel to each other. So interesting. And Gavin's stories being parallel to each other and Scott's stories being parallel to each other is just so interesting how that plays out. I mean, to be fair, I brought it up last a previous episode too. That's like, well, Riley and Josh did run into Sam in like the 80s, but it wasn't the same like trajectory storyline wise of like obviously what Sam's going through in both 2021 as well as 10,000 BC. But either way, we get the interesting reveal at the end that Maya is a lot more involved in this stuff than we initially think. Because I was about to say, like, is she not actually Maya Schmidt? It made me wonder about that, considering the fact that, but it's like, right, she introduced herself as that back then for Gavin, but it could easily be a thing of, well, the lady is good at suppressing memories. I don't know if she can alter them or not. But it could also just be like no, she specifically, she used the name Maya Schmidt back then, knowing that this was going to be a larger manipulation. So that's why I'm wondering, like, Petra, like, is this actually her mom, and her mom's actually the bad guy, or is it someone pretending to be the real Maya, whereas like maybe the real Maya, they did go out of their way to capture Petra, and that was the biggest thing of like, wait, how are they going to use her as leverage against Maya? Like, unless, because at the time I was like, maybe they already have Maya, and getting Petra was going to be how they get her to work for them. But it's like, well, no, Maya's free, so there's like, how does that all work? It's like, well, if that's not really Maya, they might have the real Maya, and ultimately maybe that's how they're, because it's like I said, I'm leaning more that direction of like the real Maya is with the military, and they got Petra to kind of force her to work, and this person is pretending to be Maya Schmidt. But like I said, you've been playing the long con if you introduced yourself way back when as which is interesting to say considering that was like present day, but still you introduced yourself as Maya Schmidt, so that might have been like the long con. I don't know. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where that ends up going, though. But Scott sadly ended up figuring it out. Sadly, he was on his own at the time, going to get Maya, but he saw the 3 scars on her arm, which Gavin remembers. This is the person that gave him Scott's paper. So it's like, right, everything she said up until this point in time was a lie. So we'll have to wait and see. But sadly, Scott ended up getting grabbed by the military people. And she comes back with this lie of like, oh yeah, the military, I tried to fight them off, but the people from the base, they grabbed Scott. So at the same time, we have Ty returning to them with the microchips. And not only can they get Eve back now, they also know where Josh and Riley are now too. So it's all coming together. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see where all this takes us. The next episode, obviously I'm getting this extremely late. The next episode's already out. In fact, the series finale airs tonight at the time you're recording this. But yeah, the penultimate episode is going to be interesting to see what happens, and ultimately see what it sets up for said series finale. So it's going to be interesting to see where all of this ends up going. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.